Well, someone fortunately managed to get this up and running, so I don't need to figure out how it works. I'm not used to using tablets. I've got a tablet at home which spends 99% of its time on a pile of books not being used. So I'm not very good at tablets. This is who I am. This is one of my inventions from 1991, active contact lens. You stick two of them in your eye and you've got a full high-resolution display straight onto your retina. Some current future books that I've written and stuff. This is a summary of my early history, and the reason I'm using this is because it gives you some good insights as to how you should be much more confident about the sort of stuff that you develop and not take no for an answer. I mentioned the active contact lens. Google managed to patent this in 2005, but 15 years after I invented it. I'm not quite sure how that works, but the US Patent Office works in strange ways. This other one, you might have heard of text messaging. I invented text messaging, and I invented it in 1991. And this is a picture from my exact first sheet of how I thought it might work. So you might send a text message saying, you know, home at 5 o'clock. And that's exactly the sort of way you use it. So we anticipated pretty much exactly the way that people ended up using text messaging. And I took what I thought was this fantastic new idea to my bosses, who had nice MBAs from good schools, who said, don't be so stupid, you have an answer phone. If you phone somebody up and they're not there, you leave a message on their answer phone. Why on earth would you want to spend time typing a message on a keypad when you can just talk the message and they'll get it back from their answer phone? Get out of my office and stop wasting my time and come back with something which is far better. And then 4 or 5 years after that, it was a system built into the mobile phone systems, which was designed so that engineers could instruct the exchange to send them an automatic response back. Some student discovered that you could use that to send messages between each other. Wasn't very efficient, which is why text messages cost so much for the first 10 years. And that's how it eventually happened. But the basic idea was thrown out because I didn't have enough confidence in it, and I gave up trying to persuade my bosses that it was a good idea after about 6 months. If I'd left BT and did it myself, I might be quite wealthy by now, because this very quickly became 50% of the revenue for every single mobile phone company. So sometimes you might come up with a new idea, quite a simple idea in some cases, and it might seem to you to be a good idea. Have the confidence to keep backing it, and don't take no for an answer, and you could become quite wealthy. Apple just brought out this really basic watch, and it's about the same size as this, and it's got tiny little buttons. I had that same idea back in 1992, and I came up with this idea of a folding watch. I thought, well, the screens are quite small, so you start off with something this big, fold it out that way, fold it out that way. Now you've got a screen this big, which is more or less the same size as a smartphone screen, and you've got all these buttons on it, and you can do the same thing. Now, this idea is 23 years ago, and yet you could easily have built it back then. We already had the interfaces, we already had a operating system designed back then to do it. Again, we could have gone ahead and done that. So quite easy to come up with ideas which might not actually be developed for 20, 25 years. And we see that happening in just about every industry. So the lesson from this is, when you get an idea, don't just be fobbed off by your boss because he didn't think of it first. Have the confidence to back it. If you really are sure it's a good idea, run with it and bang on every door in the company until somebody finally listens and runs with it. So I'm going to cover a few areas which I asked to cover in this presentation. I'm going to look at the impact of robotics first off, and then how we might travel to work in the near future, and then the changing roles in IT, because you will not be working in the same role in a few years as you're working in today. So whatever it is you're doing, it's going to evolve dramatically quickly. The business you're currently in is quite likely to get wiped out and replaced by something else. So your job will continue to migrate and evolve over your entire career, probably dozens of times. And importantly, some of those new areas will have an awful lot of ethical and moral implications. And I keep telling everybody in engineering, it's very important that you take account of those, because engineers and technicians understand the technology, they understand what you can do with it, so they're in pole position when it comes to understanding the problems that might result from it. So you're almost the high priests really guarding the rest of society, because the vast majority of people out there haven't got a clue about this stuff. They can't make those decisions because they don't know what the possibilities are. So it falls on you and you later on in your careers to make those decisions on everybody else's behalf. So you need to cultivate a very strong ethical value set and look after these sort of moral impacts essentially, and do engineering in a responsible fashion. And that actually does quite a lot for your company too. I first wrote a paper on this in BT on the need for responsible development. And that knocked BT from being way at the back of the field to being the second highest company in the UK in terms of moral standing as an engineering company. So, one single paper can do that, and the companies outside that might hate you suddenly love you because you're starting to look after the right interests. And with social networking and stuff these days, it's very important that people out there support you, because if they don't, they can organise a backlash against you. So these are not trivial things. These are things which will really affect the personal integrity of you in your company, but also the brand values within your company as well. So let's get on with the content. AI and robotics, you hear about every day in the press now. AI is moving forwards in leaps and bounds, having done not very much for the last 30 years. It now is doing an awful lot of things, and people are starting to ask questions of whether the robots might rebel and all these jobs that might be lost to robotics and stuff. So I'm going to cover a few of those areas. But the key things here are that AI doesn't have to be inside the robot. Everybody always assumes that the AI is inside the robot. It doesn't have to be. AI is in the cloud or on a server 15,000 miles away. It doesn't make any difference. The fact is that the AI can connect to that robot, so it essentially seems to be there, but it can be anywhere. You can replicate it, you can edit it, you can even make it emotional. We already have the basic ideas of how to make emotional AI, and once we get it doing well enough, Google and Microsoft and IBM and all these other companies are all working on getting this stuff so good that it can act as your agent and spend your cash because it knows you so well, and do lots of other things on your behalf. And probably just as important, it can also add extra security, because it can talk at gigabits per second, so it can negotiate with some other piece of IT incredibly quickly and swap codes and passwords this long instead of a tiny little one which isn't secure. So there's a lot of benefits from going down that road. A typical example of where AI is right now, one of the most famous AIs in the world is IBM's Watson, which was the first piece of AI really which beat humans in a human-like AI illustration. It was a computer. It was a game on TV where you had to guess questions and stuff, and the computers got better at that than people, and the world champion now is a computer. But IBM took that and they decided to apply it to things that are useful. And the first instance they could find for applying it to was the medical profession. So what it does now is it sucks in all the information from every possible source on your medical criteria, whether it's your medical records or your parents' medical records, your grandparents' medical records. It measures everything coming out of the equipment, all your blood test results. It does everything, pulls it all together, and then makes some really useful conclusions. But medicine is just the first thing that they're applying it to, and then they're going to apply it to every other field of life. So they're doing that. So is Google. I expect Microsoft are too, Samsung will be, all the other big IT companies will be doing exactly the same thing, and the consequence is that AI will go through the roof in terms of its overall impacts. Also, robotics will move into things like printing. We're starting to see 3D printing, and everyone's getting really carried away with the overhype in this, so beware of the overhype. You can't do everything with 3D printing, but you still can do a hell of a lot. But the next generation is using the robotics that exists inside factories, where you just take stuff out of a bucket and you plug it into a printed circuit board. There's no reason why you can't do that with 3D printing. So you can print this nice object, and whatever it looks like, it could be a bottle or something, but during the 3D printing process, you take a couple of chips out of this bucket and you plug it into the lid or into the base, and you make a really more sophisticated device. And that's linking the robotics into the 3D printing process, and that's where it's going to go next. So 3D printing today is bits of dumb plastic or dumb titanium alloy or something. In the future, it'll contain lots of electronics as well. Now, as a technician, you might be working in software for the moment, but you might also be working on Internet of Things technology next year. That requires you to get into making physical gadgets. So you might be doing that as a technician. You could be the guy in charge of configuring the 3D printers in the lab. So your architect has come up with this brand new gadget, is given the job to you to actually build it. And what you do is you configure it all, so it takes this device, shoves it into this, and you as the technician then produce this fantastic device that does something wonderful with lots of IT built into it, maybe some micromechanics built into it, which links together all of that. And then you've got to write some blue tack and Velcro software to link the bits together as well. So there are some very powerful roles in there for technicians. So don't be too hung up by what your technician role might be for this year or next year or the year after. Very, very quickly you might be moving it into another field using those same sorts of expertise, and your job will change beyond recognition. Engineers talk an awful lot about the singularity. You've probably heard about this concept, and the idea is that as you develop smarter and smarter artificial intelligence, it gives you more assistance in the design of the next generation. Now, up until 1988, all of the chip design was done by human beings. In 1989, some software came out that allowed the computer to do 98% or thereabouts of the circuit layouts on the new chips. So at that point, only 2% of chip design was done by human beings. But the really difficult stuff still was. These days, it's probably even less. But that means that you can design the chips faster and better. And now every generation of AI allows you to increase that rate almost infinitely. But the almost is a key word. You can't actually make it go infinite because you've got to build the factories, you've got to raise the resources to do that, you've got to get through all the legal regulations and stuff. So the actual implementation rate is much more limited. So people will talk all sorts of crap about the singularity. Don't be too taken in by that hype. The reality is a much slower version. The principle hasn't gone away, but the reality is much slower, and it'll be much more manageable with far fewer threats than the scientific concept originally brings in. However, there are some really big consequences, and these affect engineers and scientists and technicians just as much as anybody else. But as we get smarter and smarter AI and smarter robotics, a lot of the really high-value jobs, whether it's brain surgery or whether it's designing a new piece of equipment, the value of the physical and intellectual work is gradually falling because you can buy robots that'll do the same sort of thing. On the other hand, the emotional skills, human skills, we're not figuring out how to do those with AI quite so quickly. We will get there, 2050 or something you'll be there, but you're going to have a decade or two where human and social skills will increase in value and the basic intellectual skills will fall in value. I call that the care economy. And a lot of people are starting to buy into this idea now, but this is an important thing because it means that you've really got to cultivate those human skills of understanding how people will use this, What are the emotional problems that people might have using it? How does it fit into their lives? How do you sell this to people using their everyday lives? And just the actual physical design or the manufacture of it is going to get less and less value. So unless you can make that adaptation, then you could find that your job is eroded. So, by all means, focus on keeping the highest level of technical skills, but don't imagine that that will keep you going forever. You've also got to develop the human skills to go with that, and understanding how the humans will be using this, what are the problems that those humans will be solving with it, why do they really want it, and if you do that too, then you can also increase your value in this new bit to offset the drop in value in some of your other skills. So providing you can make that adaptation, it's not a threat. If you don't make that adaptation, you could be wiped out. To capitalize on this, I'm glad we've got at least some women in this audience, because a long time ago in the agricultural age, almost all of the jobs that actually got paid for, women did lots of work back then too, but almost everything that you paid for was men's work. And then we got the industrial age, and it was still mostly men's work, but there were a few jobs which were pretty gender neutral. These days, we're in the information age. We've got quite a mixture. We've got one or two jobs where men still dominate, and there's proof of that is in this room. We've got mostly men and a few women, so it's still mostly engineering is still a male-dominated job. Things like marketing and sales and stuff, HR particularly, are still dominated very much by women. But most jobs can be done by either gender just as easily. However, the next generation, as AI takes effect and as robotics takes effect, futurists are starting to call this century the woman's century, because most of the new jobs are actually interpersonal skills based, emotional skills based. Now, as a man, I could list about 6 different emotions. The women in the room could probably list 20 or 30 different emotions, and they're probably capable in most of those. My wife thinks that I'm autistic. We have some big problems there. Most of the new jobs coming along are actually more focused on the traditional women's skills. I'm not suggesting the men should get a sex change, but you need to be able to adapt your skills and learn how to do that. I'm sure you're just as capable of women as doing that if you try, but if you don't, you could be left behind. And we're starting to see women getting a much more important role. That's not a bad thing, but it doesn't mean that the men have to become redundant. Next phase, travel. How do you get to work? Well, one of the big things we've already heard in the first presentation today, that it's not just about driving cars. It's about the logistics and the self-driving delivery trucks and the self-driving big trucks and stuff. And we realized this a long time ago, that you can actually reconfigure the whole system. So you've got the supplier with a much better link to the customer via the web. And what they really want, since they're at work half the time, is if you could deliver this to a local corner shop, and then you could pick it up on your way home from work and stuff. And then if better still, you could get somebody who you trust to deliver it to them, and then they've got a backdoor key and they can put it straight into your house. It's a trust-based relationship. And we realized this chart dates way back to 1995, 20 years ago. Amazon first started doing this in 2012. So it was, 17 years between this idea coming onto into the media and it actually been implemented. And that isn't a technological barrier, it's just how long it takes for ideas to catch up with where society is at the time. Self-driving cars, it's not just about Google, but that's what their car looks like. I can't imagine I'm going to run out and buy one. But as the first presentation said, you probably won't buy one. When the self-driving cars are out there, you'll just touch an app on your mobile phone and it'll turn up, just like an Uber taxi will. In fact, Uber got a contract with Tesla to buy every single car that they produce over the next few years, because they want to make a self-driving car fleet so they can get rid of all the actual human taxi drivers. So that's really progressing enormously quickly. Be a bit careful what you say about that on the media. I tweeted last week about Uber and taxi drivers. Yesterday we had a cyber attack on Future Horizon from a taxi company. trying to kill our company. Fortunately, my security protocols are pretty good, so they didn't have any effect. But the people are attacking us just because I wrote a tweet against taxi drivers. So be careful what you say. But really, it's a job which is becoming much less required. You just do not need taxi drivers when you've got big fleets of self-driving cars. You also don't need your own self-driving car because you can get one to turn up within a couple of minutes of you needing one, and it takes you exactly where you want to go, drops you off, and then it clears off to look after somebody else. So you don't need to own one of these. That means you save £5,000 a year that you can spend on something much more useful. So that's the way it's going to go. Excuse me?
I love the way they still need wing mirrors now. It's no steering wheel, but it's got wing mirrors.
It does. I think the reason it has the wing mirrors is because with the early versions, they had to have the capability for the human being to take control. I think they've had 6 accidents in the Google cars over the years. None of those have been when the car has been in control. All of those have been when the human being has been in control. But the human being needs the wing mirrors. And you probably find it's part of the regulation that your car has to have a wing mirror anyway. So we're in an adaptation area. I really hope that their future cars look a little bit better than that, because I wouldn't be seen dead in that, frankly. But, lots of gadgets that they're adding to it. I'm not going to even bother with this because you can check this on Google anytime you like, but there's lots and lots of technology thrown into this, and it will get an awful lot better. But going away from the shape of the Google car, supposing you make them this shape, there's really no reason why they need to be streamlined, because you're going to drive these things millimeters apart, so there's no drag. So why do you make them streamlined? Total waste of space. If you make them cubical or cuboidal, if it's the right word, you can get all of the space for the people inside, or if you're using it for delivery, you've got all that space as a container or something. If you make them all the same size, you can make them right next to each other, literally millimeters apart, because the controls can react that quickly. The simple calculations suggest you can get 5 times more cars on the road in the first implementations than you can at the moment. But there's nothing to stop you if you make them all the same size. You can actually make these 2 or 3 layers high. You could easily get 15 times more cars on the same stretch of road using that exact same technology. So you could do a hell of a lot better. You can almost eliminate congestion. So I can't wait for it to go that way. This is reducing the drag, reduces the energy, it reduces the resources that you need, because if they're not crashing, you don't need to have all the crumple zones. So each car requires far less resource, far less energy. You can power them directly by inductive coils in the road surface. You don't need very much in the way of batteries. It's win, 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 win. Almost no accidents, no environmental impact, instant response, total social inclusivity. There is no reason why we shouldn't go down that road as fast as we possibly can get there. A few thousand taxi drivers will be wiped out of a job and have to retrain, but that's a small price to pay, and I'm sure we can find them some other jobs to do. You can do exactly the same with the railways. I spent a good 45 minutes explaining to the Department for Transport why this new idea of HS2 is total pants, and how instead they should be spending the same 70 billion to do exactly the same self-driving car technology on the railways, with self-driving pods that go to wherever they want to go, and they just get streamlined off at the stations, and then they can go straight onto the roads and take you all the way to your door. If you do that, you capitalize on a performance metric in telecoms. When it was all one wire per phone call, you used to be able to get about 2 or 3% occupancy on the telephone network. When we introduced packet switching, the cost of telephone calls plummeted, because now you can get 80–90% occupancy on those same wires. All the calls share the same optical fibers. You can do the same with the roads. The average piece of railway in the UK is used for 0.4% of the time. If you stand beside it, that's how often a train goes past. It's only been used 0.4%. Performance engineering says you can go right up to 80% plus, and 90% is not unreasonable. before you start getting any problems. That means you can get 200 times more people carried on the railways than you currently have. Given that you've also increased the capacity of the roads by a factor of 15 or 20, you know, we will not have any congestion if we do this right. We should be going that route. With HS2, you'll still have the 0.4% occupancy. We're introducing a 19th century delivery system into a 21st century thing, which will be locked in with all those inefficiencies for another 30 years. It's really stupid ways of doing things. So we should be trying to get people to adopt these new ways of working and enforcing them into the systems. These are the sorts of things that technicians will be very involved in demonstrating by building the actual systems. Your bosses might come up with the ideas, and then you're the ones that actually have to make it happen by building all of that software and actually making the circuits and making the developments and stuff. So far better doing it that way. And then one day we had this idea of playing with Scalextrics, and we realized that the cars on Scalextrics don't have batteries. They're powered directly by the road surface. And we thought, hang about it, you know, some guys just come up with this wireless electricity where you have an inductive coil in the road surface which powers the car as it drives over the top of it. That's gone from being an idea. It's now in prototype and it's being trialed and it works. So you can have a tiny little battery in the car, which is enough to get from the main road to your house. Once it's on the main road, it's powered entirely by inductive coils in the road surface, and it comes off at the other end with a fully charged battery for the last 2 or 3 miles. So you can get away with a tiny lithium battery. So again, the resource requirements plummet through the floor. So it's win-win-win. This is another one of my ideas where I realized you can take the same idea and do it to bicycles. All competent engineers will come up with at least one redesign of a bicycle during their career. This is my one. Yours will look probably a bit different. I realized you could go to Halfords and buy a metal plate for £5, bolt it to your front forks, and you can make a linear induction lane with a linear induction motor in it and pull the bicycle along. And you can pull it along at 30 miles an hour if you so desire. That means you can just sit on your bicycle and get carried all the way to the office. You don't then have to queue half an hour to get access to the shower cubicle because you're absolutely fresh, you're not in a sweat. And it costs about £5 to modify the bike. There are no moving parts in the rubber mat that you roll out. And you can basically roll the rubber mat out at the side of the road, you call it the bicycle lane, plug it into a lamppost, and it provides all of the power that you need to run that with. So no moving parts except the actual bicycle, and you can make that. So this isn't in production yet, but government likes it, the Department for Transport likes it. You could go out and build that and make a company out of it. I could if I wasn't so lazy and if I had any entrepreneurial skill. This is one I came up with for Dunlop, again looking at transport. And again, this is where a technician would be absolutely essential. I can come up with an idea, but I haven't got a clue how to build this. My idea was that you could make a tyre on a Formula One racing track, for example, and the tyres wear down really quickly. But when you're coming into a corner, you need more grip. So why not make the tyres full to the brim with IT? And a little bit of software, of course, in there as well. But in a race team with some software engineers and some hardware engineers, you could make these little devices which are, maybe little bits of graphene or some carbon nanotubes built into the tyre, and they're basically Eiffel Tower structure. And when it's like that shape, if you pull the base together using a polymer gel, the top moves up. Of course it does, because the height increases. So it sits inside the tyre. When you contract the base using your IT, a little bit of electricity, those spiky bits stick out through the tyre surface, dramatically increasing your grip as you go into the tyre. Once you go back into the straight, they retract and your tyres last longer. So you can make tyres which are variable grip, but that makes the tyre IT. So you might be working in IT writing software, but that software in IT is just as important in Formula One racing, making the tyres stick to the roads, as it is today making a website work. So just because you're working in website design today doesn't mean you couldn't be working in Formula One racing a couple of years down the road. It's exactly the same sorts of skills. And this again allows you to get together some technicians are very good at doing the hardware bits, some technicians are very good at the blue tack and Velcro software to make it work, but it doesn't make any difference. You're still part of that team, and you could make a Formula One tyre far better quality. And of course, starting in Formula One in 5 years, 10 years time, that could be in a Ford Focus or something like that. So, you know, this is something which you could gradually change people's lives with. So what roles might you be getting into? You know, this is a picture of IT as it currently stands, and it's just about getting into every area of your life. And I probably ran out of ideas before I ran out in space on the slide, but it doesn't matter which area you look at. IT is becoming more and more prominent, and whether it's website design or the basic code or the artificial intelligence, there are strong roles for IT technicians in those. And once you spend a little bit of time as a technician, then you become the architect and you gradually move up through the company ranks. And of course, you know, at any level in there, you can come up with new ideas that maybe your boss didn't think of, which helps you to move on to the next levels and do something even more important. It also, we're seeing a lot of wars between the different companies within IT. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but I did this initially for a telecoms conference. I was looking at it from a telecoms point of view as to all these non-telecoms companies who all were intending how would they carve up our industry between them. And every single big IT company in the world has its eyes on the massive telecoms industry and how are they going to carve it up and what's their share. You know, companies like Amazon, which used to sell books, are thinking of running their own networks. Facebook are putting in their own networks. Google are putting in their own networks. IBM, Sony, all these other companies, exactly the same. All of them are looking at it. But it isn't just telecoms. You could use that same slide for almost any field of IT. So again, you might be working in whatever area, in a website design or a piece of software design, in whichever company today, but you could be working in a completely different company doing a completely different kind of a job for a different reason tomorrow, and those same skills that you've got are still applicable. All you've got to do is adapt them slightly into this new field, and that shouldn't really take very long to do that. So it provides you with enormous opportunities. Now, we heard in the first presentation again that the banks are not in an entirely invulnerable situation. Everybody hates the banks. Well, most people hate the banks. And we're seeing things like 3D printing coming along. If you can put electronics into 3D printing, there's nothing to stop you making little gadgets that look like whatever you want to look like, but they've got the IT bits that make it into electronic cash all built into those. So you can make, you know, any kind of physical gadget, but it's a piece of cash. You can walk into Starbucks and buy a cup of coffee using this little lump of plastic that you just made. So it doesn't have to be cash built into a mobile phone app. It could be built into anything at all that you can physically make using a 3D printer. And guess who it is in the company that's going to make up the prototype of that? It's not the engineer that thinks up the idea at its architectural level or the boss. It's going to come all the way down to some technician somewhere and whose boss says to him, you know, we'd quite like to do this. You know how to use that printer. You know how to do this. You get on with it and build it, and then we'll take the credit. You know, that's how it works. So it's ultimately it's a technician role, but then again, that's how the technician generates the capability and generates the skills that impress the boss that make them into the next architect, and you gradually move up the ranks. You know, by doing the building and proving that you can do that, and maybe adding a little bit of personal flair along the way. You know, putting in a new idea that you thought of that your boss didn't. You know, all of those things put you in a better position and help move you up the ladder a little bit faster. One of the really key things in there is the idea of miniaturization. You can put things very, very small now, and this is generating whole new fields. We're seeing smart watches like you know, the Apple Watch, for example. They're quite small, but other people have already started to do signet rings with lots of IT security built into that. Orange came up with the idea of an earring stud, and you can replace all of your current IT, literally, with an earring stud. The basic laws of physics in there suggest that you can get about 50 times more capability than your entire brain has in 1 millimeter cubed. and the average earring stud is much bigger than 1 millimeter cubed. It's probably 5 or 6 millimeters cubed. So you can get your entire office in one single earring. Whether you want to do that is a different question, but you could. So this brings in some new threats, and this is an opportunity for technicians and engineers. On a similar scale, this picture of an ordinary everyday garden ant. At that scale, this is how big the first computer would be that I started my working life. Apple II, it had about 32K memory, chip had only about 8,600 transistors in it or something. Each of those dots is how big that would be compared to an ant. If it's that small, and given that I was writing missile simulations, word processors, spreadsheets, and all sorts of other stuff on those computers, if you could just drop those through the little vents in a photocopy machine, for example, they can just land on wires, they can intercept all the signals sent through that. That's an enormously powerful espionage threat. So your air conditioning system becomes a security threat. Now, one of the technician's responsibilities traditionally is making sure that the office or the laboratory is nice and clean. How the hell do you make your office nice and clean when you need an electron microscope and about 6 months to inspect every piece of keyboard to make sure there are no spyware on there? Because when you type, even before the button goes down to the bottom and registers as a type, you've already intercepted the fact that it's been touched, sent that across the net to a cloud. Someone else has already hacked into your bank account and stolen your idea before you've even typed the letters. So, this is a major security threat, and you're going to have to develop whole new sets of skills to deal with that kind of thing. So, again, massive new areas for expansion of your job. And the good news in this is that, if you think you've got lots of opportunities today, these opportunities are really increasing in leaps and bounds with all of these new threats are opportunities for the next generation of software and hardware designers, all of whom need some technicians to help build all of this stuff. Other people want to make it more human. The banks know that we don't like using bank stuff, so they're trying to figure out new ways of transferring cash. It occurred to me that we can use cash which was developed by MIT circa 1998. They realized that by shaking hands, difficult to shake hands with yourself actually because they're not designed right, but you can transmit 2 megabits per second of data across a handshake. And that was 1998. You could probably do 10 meg now. If you can do that, you can transmit a code that long really to authenticate that transaction. So it's not just a simple password. You've also got the handprint recognition, the fingerprint recognition, everything else. You might be wearing some signet rings on top of that. So you can make that incredibly secure. And the really good thing about that is that in the old days, people used to shake hands to prove trust. So you'd shake hands on someone to verify a contract. So you could say, right, we've agreed £100,000 for this project. You shake hands on the deal. That verifies exactly where it is. It records the last 10 seconds of voice print. It records the GPS coordinates. It totally authenticates it with a 1,000-digit key going between it across your hands. You can make that sort of thing incredibly secure. Again, the technicians are the guys who are going to have to build all the working systems to prove it all and debug it all. Casual displays. You're going to have these things all over the place, all over the office, all over the laboratory. You can make as many of these things as you like, and they're going to be dirt cheap. So what might you do with casual displays? Well, you're going to use them as part of the Internet of Things. Internet of Things allows you to make sensor networks, clouds, tags everywhere. You're going to have lots of devices all over the place doing all sorts of really clever stuff in the Internet of Things. Again, you've got to build that. You're going to find lots of security problems, interworking problems, lots more blue tack and Velcro to be made to link these things together into workable systems. Again, that's the primary job of technicians, is to solve these issues where this bit doesn't talk to that because they've got some slight incompatibilities. That's the sort of job that technicians usually end up having to solve. You might also get back into the next degree of circular development. Everybody assumes now that everything's done in the cloud. Well, it wasn't always done in the cloud, and it won't be again. Started off, we used things like hard drives to store information. And then we discovered these memory chips, memory cards. Then we started using the network. And then recordable DVDs came on the scene, and we realized we could actually transmit enormous amounts of data using that. And then hard drives had already moved forward, so we started using them again. And then it came back to memory cards, and it's going round and round in circles. So, you know, these technologies, whatever goes out of fashion this year, it might be back in fashion in 2 or 3 years' time. Sponge networks, fog, lots of responses to people not liking the security, for example. This is moving forwards in leaps and bounds, and people will make networks which bypass the government surveillance in all of these systems, which is implicit. The government can intercept all of these things. So supposing you make devices which talk to each other using oxygen absorption band, the signals don't go any further than that before they get absorbed. It gives you a watertight alternative to the net, which people might use to bypass government surveillance. A lot of people are trying to build that sort of stuff. You might be building it. Some opportunities come from using augmented reality. This is an enormous new field just about to hit the world over the next couple of years. We see Facebook with their Oculus Rift system. We've got Google with Google Cardboard. We've got IBM and Microsoft with their HoloLens, and everybody else is all coming up with different systems for doing this. But you know, when I go with my wife, she goes shopping and she spends an hour choosing a new dress or something, I am bored sick. But I like playing computer games, and she doesn't want me to rush her out of the shop. So the idea is that I go out onto the main part of the shopping mall together with all the other loose men, and we all grab our laser cannons and we start shooting zombies coming up the escalators. So we're all happy. You know, we're shooting aliens and zombies. Wives are choosing their dresses and things. Everybody's happy, and that's the sort of stuff you can do with augmented reality. Enormous numbers of opportunities. Running behind time, I'm just going to skip a couple of slides. Getting into the ethics side of this now, and this is really important, is we're starting to see capabilities for the technical stuff getting really, really small, generating new areas for potential. This is an idea I had in 2001, which is now starting to happen. We're now starting to see the first implementations of this, where you make a 5-layer structure of electronics on the skin surface, and your skin is a viable platform. You can transmit information through it. You can also connect to the nervous system, record sensations, monitor your blood chemistry, and monitor your health and stuff. This is going to be a massive field, and I'm doing lots of work with beauty consultants, and MIT are looking at this as a new form of electronics. This will be a major field over the next few years. So where does it bring us to? Well, firstly, you've got to look at the structure of companies. At the moment, we're looking at companies trying to take too much information at the top. We're seeing backlashes every day on the news against this. Far too many people becoming billionaires while everybody else is taking a very small share. The backlash against that is really the backlash against this. And Barclays were the guys that started doing that. But they, treating everybody except the board as an us and them situation, and wanted to keep everything at the top and not give anybody else anything, is not a sustainable way. And it will move towards all the other stakeholders getting a much bigger share, whether you like it or not. That's the way it's going to go. But the trust is dematerializing. We're starting to see people getting much less trustful of big companies and government. And when you're developing your kit, it's particularly important that you stay on the right side of this trust fence. If you get on the wrong side of it, you will find backlashes using the social media trying to kill you and your company because you're doing things which everybody else doesn't want you to do. It's very important that you stay on the right side of the ethical fence, because you'll be monitored by every single person out there, and they can immediately backlash on Twitter and Facebook and everything else. And going back to a theme I mentioned earlier, because the expertise is being so concentrated in the minds of engineers and technicians who really understand how this kit works, and everybody else out there has got no understanding at all of how the kit works. How many of your friends understand how their TV works, for example? There's not very many of them. You just watch it, they're quite happy to watch it, but they haven't got a clue how an LED TV works. Some of us do, but most people don't. professional knowledge of that sort is concentrated in a very, very small minority, and everybody else knows all about these things like fashion and sports and celebrity culture. Loads of people know about that kind of stuff. Hardly anybody knows about this, and that puts you in that position of being a high priest or a high priestess with the same sort of social status in the future as the high priests and priestesses did thousands of years ago, with all of the same power corrupts and absolute power corrupting absolutely. Those threats are there as well. You will need to have some personal integrity and personal morality to make sure that you don't abuse that and that you actually use your skills and your elite knowledge for the benefit of the whole of society. Essentially, society has to outsource those decisions to you because our leaders don't understand enough about them to make those decisions credibly. The only people that do are scientists, engineers, and technicians. And when it gets to things like messing with the natural world, for example, where you start linking IT into organisms. So, for example, pandas are going extinct. The reasons pandas are going extinct is because pandas have got a really crap sex life. So supposing you design Panda 2.0 with a GPS chip and a direct link to a social networking dating site so that the panda in the forest can find out where the other cute pandas are, hook up, and then it's got all of these nice chat-up lines buzzing through its brain so that it can end up with more pandas, basically. So you can see how you could improve nature going down that road. But it's a very ethical area, a lot of skills in there as well. We need to really work on that. And eventually you're going to get to the point where you can improve your brain too. We're looking at chips and sticking them into the brain. We're looking at using smart yogurt and eating that, and it'll put all sorts of nanotechnology devices and give you an IQ of 1,000. Should you do that? Should you not do that? If you're doing it, what safeguards do you need to put in there to stop people taking over the world or Terminator scenarios? The leaders in government don't understand that. You will. Technicians, engineers, scientists understand that it's a high priest, high priestess role. You've got to use that responsibility responsibly, and you will have to learn to do that. And to finish with, human-machine evolution isn't going to stop. You know, we started off Homo habilis. This back bit's changing at the moment, so I need to update the slide slightly. But soon we'll be linking your brain to machine, Homo cyberneticus, improving your genome to make Homo optimus. Well, why not do both and make Homo hybridus? A little bit further on, we work out how to take over the brain. You make Homo zombius. Meanwhile, we wipe out all the ordinary people because they're so primitive, so they become Homo sapiens luditus. They eventually fizzle out. Meanwhile, AI is progressing, robotics primus, you know, things like Watson are just starting to catch up. That'll eventually migrate to a whole suite of those sorts of things and emerge with those too. So you get Homo machinus. With miniaturization, you can make them much smaller. You can make fairies. Fairies are really good because you can make spaceships that can have far more fairies, far less energy. So I'm suggesting that you could have intergalactic travel using spaceships, you know, with people this big in them, basically fairies, and you might as well make them fly because it's zero gravity. So, you know, these are entirely frivolous futures, but they're all theoretically possible. Who the hell knows which way it's actually going to go? So I thought the future for mankind is Homo whateverus. It's not very good Latin, but you know what it means. So really, that future is in the hands of the next generation of IT engineers, and I'm looking at them in this room. And I've probably got another 10 years of my career left before I retire. I'm not going to solve this. You guys, some of you guys might be solving this, and my kids will have to put up with the results of that. That brings me to the end of my presentation. If we have any immediate questions, I don't mind answering those. Otherwise, I'm going to go straight into the workshop stage where I'm going to make you work out what you're going to do about all of this.